The number one thing that can turn a restoration business upside down is actually a workers' comp claim that has gone south. One of the scariest moments in restoration, I open up my phone and I get a text message from our office manager telling us, call me urgently. So-and-so had fallen off the roof. He's getting rushed to the ER. And at that point, I just felt a wave of panic and anxiety hit me. All I was thinking about was how my dad's business went out of business previously due to the fact that he had a worker fall off the roof and get super injured. Now, luckily, the workers' comp claim process went pretty well due to the fact that we had 5 things and tactics in place that I'm about to teach you within this video. Let's dive in. So first, I know you're probably curious what happened with the worker, and luckily the worker is perfectly fine, super recovered, and actually is one of the highest earning crew chiefs at Romexterra. He did not suffer any long-term injuries from the incident. But basically what had happened was he was out at a property and had a ladder that he was working up kind of on the roof line of a building, and he was up about 2 stories high on the ladder, and the ladder slipped from underneath him. And on his way down, he ended up hitting his head against an HVAC pipe that was coming out of the side of the house. Ended up doing some damage to his neck and to his head. 911 was called right away. It was a very traumatic experience for the technician that was working alongside with him that day. They ended up going to the hospital. He had a couple of days of a hospital visit and a couple months of recovery, but luckily the worker ended up being perfectly fine. So I want restorers to really feel prepared when they go into the mishap of potentially having a workers' comp claim. So the reason I'm sharing these stories is because I have learned a lot from this incident, how it's different than my dad's incident, and I want restorers across the globe to feel prepared that if God forbid something happens, they have the right measures in place so it's not a does my business die due to this incident. So let's dive into the 5 things that I found went in our favor during this workers' comp incident. So the first thing that we had in place was this thing called an IIPP, which is an illness and injury prevention program. And basically this is a full SOP that you basically compile together, and it has a lot of different things like toolbox talks and safety trainings and fit testing and stuff like that you should be doing for your organization. Now, the one thing that most restorers don't know is you don't have to go out and hire an expensive consultant to implement this. You could actually call your workers' comp carrier and they'll actually help you through this entire process. So about 9 months prior to the incident, we had actually called our workers' comp carrier and asked them to put together that IIPP. And basically that was all put together. We had to do some training with our team, have our team sign off on that. And once we had it all put together, it actually helped us a lot. Because once the claim happened and there was an OSHA investigation that started, both OSHA and the workers' comp carrier were heavily auditing everything that we were doing, and they were very pleased to find the fact that we actually had an IIPP. So the second thing that we had in place was weekly safety meetings or toolbox talks, which are actually something that's required by OSHA. So every single Monday morning, basically the crew would come in and we would have people sign off on a sign-on sheet that they were there and they listened to that specific safety topic. And we used OSHA's website to come up with ideas for those toolbox talks. And actually about 4 weeks prior to the incident, we had done a ladder safety training. And in that ladder safety training, we talked about angles and obstructions and so on and so forth. And we had our employees that actually signed off on that, and we had that on file. And that actually worked very favorably towards the whole OSHA and workers' comp investigation and helped us. It's a very simple thing that you could do. OSHA has a ton of free resources out there, but if you're running a restoration company and you're not doing weekly toolbox talks, you 100% have to, because if something happens and you don't have that, you're toast. Now, the third thing I learned from this ordeal was actually not intentionally put in place for workers' comp purposes, but it actually ended up working in our favor. So anytime, first of all, when the employee was taken to the hospitals ask if it's a work-related injury, and that ends up getting filed somewhere where there's a bunch of public knowledge, OSHA gets involved, so on and so forth. So now we got a bunch of governmental entities and a bunch of people that know, hey, you have this employee that got hurt. Now, on the flip side, there are injury and malpractice attorneys that always monitor those threads, and they're able to monitor when those incidents are recorded, and they actually go on and they hound the employees. And I was completely unaware of this at the time. But the employee ended up coming to my office a couple months later, and, we were kind of catching up, and he told me, these workers' comp attorneys were all, calling me and telling me that I could be making millions of dollars off of this thing, that I should be suing you guys, and so on and so forth. But, I really love where I work here. I love the support that you provide for us here. I love the fact that you cared about me. You texted me while I was in the hospital. Marie, who was our office manager at the time, went to the hospital and stayed there with him, and so on and so forth. And because of our culture, because of the bond that we had with that employee, because he believed in our mission, vision, and values, that employee decided to say no to the workers' comp attorney that was promising him this settlement of millions of dollars and not trigger this entire lawsuit. So it's really important to understand we didn't intentionally have good relationships with our employees to avoid workers' comp incidents, but it's another perk that we actually received from it. So if you really don't care about your employees, you really don't have a strong culture, strong values, this is another reason why you should probably look at investing into that, because it could mean the difference between a massive lawsuit and a headache or not when an employee actually gets injured. So the fourth thing that we did, and I think we did very well, was full-on compliance and being fully non-argumentative with all the material interest parties. So from when we called 911, we established a line of communication with the paramedics that came and, picked up the worker from the job site to the hospital. We managed a relationship with the doctors and the ER nurses at the hospital, even though we had no obligation to do that. We immediately notified OSHA, and we managed a relationship with the field investigator from OSHA and the insurance adjuster from the workers' comp. And we were not combative, right? We were there. We were all concerned about the employee's health and well-being, and we just showed that we care. And the compliance with all these materially interested parties made the process very smoothly. We had advice that was given to us from the OSHA officer, and technically we should have had some sort of fine, because anytime OSHA gets involved, they like doing those fines. He was a little softer on the fine. Actually, we ended up not having to pay the fine. We just had to show that we had some corrective action. The doctors, the nurses, everybody really saw that we genuinely cared and that we were super compliant. We made their lives easier throughout the process, and I think there was some reciprocity that happened there where they made our lives easier as an employer as well. I think the number one thing is don't try to be the smart ass that's defensive and combative. Just be compliant and talk with all the different authorities. It'll get you a lot more in the long run. And then the last piece that really helped and worked in our favor was our relationship with our insurance broker, and the fact that we had a restoration-specific insurance broker that underwrote a restoration-specific workers' comp policy. So the individual was actually performing emergency services, and typically the way we were paying workers' comp insurance was under the emergency services class code that very few workers' comp carriers understand. And he was up on a ladder close to the roof. So any workers' comp company could have probably denied that and said, oh, well, he was probably a roofer. You didn't pay the 21% class code for that specific person. But because we had an insurance agent that really understood restoration, and because our insurance carrier was one of very few that insures restoration companies, this is a huge niche, they were able to understand what the worker was actually doing and that the worker wasn't a roofer. He was just providing emergency services at the time. And it really helped that process go very fast. And our insurance agent was really on our side since the moment we filed the claim till, the final end, and they were advising us constantly. So I think if you don't have an insurance agent that specializes in restoration insurance, and there's very few of them in the States, you should totally go and find one, because it can make the difference in a claim like this. Because restoration works a little bit different than any other typical contracting, and the workers' comp claims and the liability claims are typically handled slightly differently. So in conclusion, workers' comp claims can put your business out of business. But if you do the 5 things that we talked about in this video, you can significantly mitigate that risk. And they're simple things. Go to your workers' comp carrier and have them help you with an illness and injury prevention program. Implement the toolbox talks. You're already probably doing some sort of stand-up. You can go to OSHA's website and do those toolbox talks and have people sign in. Very easy. Create bonds with your employees. They're our most valuable asset within restoration organizations, and you don't find them on the balance sheet, you don't find them on the profit and loss, but they are by far the most important asset. If shit hits the fan, Make sure you follow through with compliance, you bow your head down, and you work with the authorities as opposed to against them. And lastly, if you don't have an insurance broker that understands restoration, it's probably time right now to go and find one. I want each and every restoration company to grow and scale and flourish, and I would hate to hear that a mishap like this can turn into something detrimental to your business. If you like this video and want to hear more about other threats that can attack your restoration business and how you can prevent them from happening, check out this next video that I shot on the 5 torpedoes under the water that can sink your restoration ship. I'll see you there.